What if Satoru Gojo had the solo leveling system? Before we start the story, I want to explain exactly how this version of the solo leveling system is going to work. Gojo is going to receive the exact same system that Sung Jinwoo has, but there's one major difference. Gojo is also going to start with Jinwoo's entire shadow army from the end of Season 2, including Igris, Tank, Iron, Tusk, Jima, Kaizel, Beru, and all of his other major shadows. Now, I know that's different from the original solo leveling story, but there's a reason for it. Jujutsu Kaisen simply doesn't have enough powerful enemies for Gojo to naturally build a shadow army. If we didn't give him Jinwoo's shadows from the start, he'd mostly just be turning cursed spirits into shadows, and that would end up feeling way too similar to Satoru Gojo's cursed spirit manipulation. I think giving Gojo Jinwoo's shadow army makes this what if a lot more fun and lets us actually use the full potential of the solo leveling system. Now with that out of the way, let's get into the story. Everything starts during the hidden inventory arc, and at first nothing changes. Gojo and Gero are still assigned to protect Riko Amanai, and everything plays out exactly like it did in canon. Eventually, Gojo fights Toji Fushiguro and is defeated just like in the original story. But right after Gojo awakens reverse curse technique, a blue screen suddenly appears in front of him. Congratulations, you have completed a hidden quest. You have been chosen as the player. At first, Gojo has no idea what's happening, but after fully healing himself, he goes back and defeats Toji just like in canon. The moment Toji falls, another notification appears. Shadow extraction has been unlocked. Arise your defeated enemy. Gojo decides to test it. He looks at Toji's body and simply says, "Arise." Dark shadows surround Toji before he slowly stands back up as Gojo's very first shadow soldier. After that, the rest of Jinwoo's shadow army is added to Gojo's inventory. Over the next few weeks, Gojo begins learning everything about the system. He completes daily quests, hidden quests, earns stat points, unlocks rewards, and learns how every part of the system works. The daily quests are incredibly easy for someone as strong as Gojo, and even if he skips them and gets sent to the penalty zone, he clears it almost instantly. Next is Jujutsu Kaisen 0, and honestly, not much changes here either. The story plays out almost exactly the same as in canon. The only major difference is that Gojo is now much stronger thanks to the system. When Suguru Geto is finally defeated, Gojo chooses not to use Arise on him. Even though he has the ability to do it, Geto is still his best friend, and there's no way Gojo would turn him into one of his shadow soldiers. After that, the story moves into the Fearsome Womb arc. Honestly, this arc barely changes. Gojo already has the system, but he doesn't really need to use it here. Next is the Vez Mojito arc, and this one also stays mostly the same because Gojo is barely involved. While Yuji and Nanami handle Mojito, Gojo continues completing system quests, leveling up, and becoming even stronger behind the scenes. Even though these early arcs don't change much, Gojo is constantly getting stronger, and the biggest changes are still yet to come. The story moves into the Kyoto Goodwill event arc, and this is where the system finally starts making a noticeable difference. Everything starts off the same with the exchange event between the Tokyo and Kyoto schools, but Gojo is much stronger than he was in the original story, because he's been constantly completing daily quests and putting all of his stat points into making himself even stronger. When Hanami attacks the event, everything starts playing out similarly at first. Yuji and Todo still fight Hanami, but this time Gojo arrives even faster than he did in canon. Hanami is forced to retreat once Gojo shows up, and honestly, nothing major changes here because Hanami still escapes. Gojo doesn't really have a reason to use his shadow army yet since he can already handle the situation himself. Next is the Death Painting arc, and this one also stays mostly the same. Yuji and Nobara still fight the Death Painting brothers while Gojo is dealing with other missions. During this time, Gojo keeps completing system quests in the background, increasing his stats, learning more about the system, and becoming even stronger. There aren't many strong opponents for him to fight yet, but every mission still helps him improve little by little. Now before we get into the Shibuya incident, Gojo has already mastered almost every part of the solo leveling system. His stats are far beyond what they were in canon, he's completely used to commanding his shadow army, and Toji has become one of his strongest shadows. Alongside Igris, Beru, Tank, Iron, Tusk, Jima, Kaizel, and the rest of Jinwoo's shadow army, Gojo now has an army that's capable of taking on special grade curses without him even needing to step in. Now we finally reach the Shibuya incident arc, and this is where Gojo having the solo leveling system completely changes the story. Kenjaku and the disaster curses still create the curtains around Shibuya, trap thousands of civilians, and demand that Satoru Gojo enter alone. Their entire plan is built around sealing him inside the prison realm because they already know they cannot defeat him in a normal fight. However, they prepared for the original Gojo, not a Gojo who has spent years gaining stat points and mastering an entire shadow army. Gojo enters the underground station just like in canon, canon, but he is not truly alone. Igris, Beru, Tusk, Tank, Iron, Jima, Kaizel, Toji, and the rest of his shadow soldiers are all hiding inside his shadow. When Gojo encounters Jogo, Hanami, and Choso, they still surround themselves with civilians and use domain amplification to get past infinity. Their plan is to force Gojo into fighting carefully so that he cannot use his strongest attacks without killing innocent people. At first, Gojo fights them by himself. Because of all the physical stats he has gained from the system, he is even faster and stronger than he was originally. Hanami is still crushed against the wall and destroyed, but Jogo, Choso, and Mahito continue filling the station with transfigured humans. Gojo quickly realizes that even though he can defeat every enemy there, protecting thousands of civilians while doing it is still the real problem. That is when Gojo finally summons his shadow army. Hundreds of soldiers rise from his shadow and spread across the station. He orders most of them to protect the civilians and destroy the transfigured humans, while his strongest shadows deal with the disaster curses. Tusk and the weaker soldiers create barriers around groups of civilians, while Igris and Beru begin clearing the station. Since the shadows can regenerate through Gojo's power, they can take attacks that would normally kill another sorcerer and continue fighting. Beru goes after Mahito, while Igris keeps Choso from supporting the others. Toji stays hidden, waiting for an opening against whichever enemy becomes the biggest threat. This allows Gojo to focus almost completely on Jogo. The villains immediately realize their plan is falling apart because the civilians are no longer restricting Gojo as much as they did in the original timeline. Mahito releases even more transfigured humans, forcing the army to spread out. Gojo still decides to use his 0.2 second unlimited void, because it is the fastest way to freeze everyone without permanently damaging the civilians. Once the domain ends, Gojo and his shadows begin clearing the station together. What took Gojo several minutes in the original story happens much faster, because Beru, Igris, Toji, and the rest of the army are helping him. However, Kenjaku was still prepared for something to go wrong. He opens the prison realm and steps in front of Gojo using Gato's body. Seeing his dead best friend still catches Gojo off guard, and years of memories begin passing through his mind. For a moment, it looks like Kenjaku's plan is still going to work, but before the prison realm can fully capture him, the system gives Gojo an emergency notification warning him that he is about to be sealed. The notification breaks his concentration just soon enough for him to react. Gojo uses Shadow Exchange and switches places with a soldier positioned outside the prison realm's range. The prison realm closes without capturing him. Kenjaku is completely shocked. His entire plan depended on removing Gojo from Shibuya, and now Gojo knows that the person controlling Gato's body is an enemy. Gojo is furious, but because it is still Gato's body, he does not immediately use an attack that could destroy it. Instead, he sends Toji and Igris after Kenjaku while he finishes dealing with the disaster curses. Jogo attempts to escape, but Gojo catches him before he can reach Yuji. This means Jogo never gets the chance to feed Yuji Sukuna's fingers. Sukuna does not awaken, Mahoraga is never summoned against him, and the destruction Sukuna caused in Shibuya never happens. Gojo defeats Jogo himself, but he cannot turn Jogo into a shadow soldier because cursed spirits disappear after they are exorcised and do not leave behind normal bodies. Choso is restrained by Igris. Instead of being killed, his strange connection to Yuji would still begin affecting him, which means he could eventually realize that Yuji is his brother and change sides like he did in canon. Meanwhile, Beru continues pressuring Mahito, preventing him from freely moving around Shibuya. The battles involving Nanami, Maki, Naobito, and Megumi also change. Dagon still traps them inside his domain, but Gojo senses the battle through the shadows he placed around the city. He sends Shadow Toji to help them. Toji enters the domain and defeats Dagon just like he did originally, except this time he remains under Gojo's control. Jogo is already dead, so he never appears afterwards to burn Nanami, Maki, and Naobito. When Toji sees Megumi, part of his original personality briefly reacts to his son. He does not attack Megumi or take his own life because he is now a shadow soldier, but Megumi notices that the soldier looks strangely familiar. Gojo does not have time to explain the truth yet, so Toji returns to the battle. Mahito is now the final disaster curse remaining. Because Gojo was never sealed and his shadows are spread throughout Shibuya, Mahito never gets the same opportunities to separate everyone. Nanami is not killed in front of Yuji, and Nobara is warned before Mahito's double can surprise her. Yuji still fights Mahito, but this time he is supported by Nanami and Beru, instead of being emotionally destroyed and left almost completely alone. Mahito eventually transforms into his stronger form, but he cannot handle all three of them together. Yuji continues damaging his soul, Nanami attacks his weak points, and Beru overwhelms him physically. When Mahito tries tries to escape, Gojo appears and finishes him before Kenjaku can absorb him. This is extremely important because Kenjaku never obtains idle transfiguration. Without Mahito's technique, he cannot properly waken the players he prepared or begin the culling game in the same way. Kenjaku realizes his entire plan has failed and releases every cursed spirit stored inside Geto's body to create an opening to escape. Gojo responds by releasing the rest of his shadow army. Tusk, Igris, Beru, Toji, and the other soldiers tear through Kenjaku's curses, while Gojo blocks every escape route. Gojo still does not want to completely destroy Geto's body, so he targets Kenjaku's exposed brain once it becomes vulnerable during the fight. With no prison realm and no disaster curses left to protect him, Kenjaku is eventually defeated. The Shibuya incident ends completely differently. After the Shibuya incident, not much happens during the Itadori's extermination arc or the perfect preparation arc. Since Gojo was never sealed and Kenjaku was defeated, the higher-ups cannot order Utah to execute Yuji, and there is no culling game for everyone to prepare for. Gojo remains active, Yuji stays protected, and the sorcerers begin recovering from everything that happened in Shibuya. However, Sukuna is still inside Yuji, and he has not forgotten about Megumi. Ever since Sukuna first saw the potential of the Ten Shadows technique, he had been waiting for the perfect opportunity to take Megumi's body. Even though Kenjaku is gone, and the timeline has completely changed, Sukuna's personal plan remains the same. Eventually, Sukuna activates the binding vow he made with Yuji and takes control of his body for 1 minute. Because Yuji does not remember making the agreement, nobody sees this coming, not even Gojo. Sukuna immediately knocks Yuji's allies away before tearing off one of his fingers and forcing Megumi to swallow it. Before anyone can stop him, Sukuna transfers himself from Yuji's body into Megumi's. Yuji finally regains control of his own body, but it is already too late. Megumi's appearance changes as Sukuna takes control, and everyone realizes that the King of Curses has escaped Yuji and gained the Ten Shadows technique. Gojo tries to step in immediately, but Sukuna escapes before he can be stopped. Even with Gojo's shadow army nearby, nobody was prepared for Sukuna to suddenly switch bodies in only a few seconds. Gojo could have defeated Yuji's version of Sukuna much more easily, but now Sukuna has Megumi's body, the Ten Shadows technique, and the potential to use Maharaga against infinity. Now, if you guys really like these timelines that I make on my YouTube channel, make sure to like and subscribe because we're trying to reach 50,000 subscribers, and let's get into it. Since there was never a culling game in this timeline, the story skips straight to the final battle. After taking over Megumi's body, Ryomen Sukuna spends the next several weeks tracking down the rest of his fingers to return to his full power. Once he finally consumes all 20 fingers and fully takes control of Megumi's body, everyone realizes the final battle can no longer be avoided. Just like in canon, the strongest sorcerer faces the strongest curse. Gojo and Sukuna meet in Shinjuku and the fight immediately begins. The opening of the battle plays out almost exactly like the original story. Both of them trade massive attacks, domain expansions collide, and the city is torn apart by their overwhelming power. Even though Gojo is stronger than he was in canon thanks to the solo leveling system, Sukuna is still powerful enough to push him to his absolute limit. However, this is where the story begins changing. Instead of fighting completely alone, Gojo finally releases his shadow army. Igris, Beru, Tusk, Tank, Iron, Kaizel, Jima, Toji, and the rest of the army emerge from his shadow. Instead of trying to defeat Sukuna themselves, their job is to constantly pressure him and create openings for Gojo. Every time Sukuna focuses on Gojo, Beru or Toji attacks from his blind side. When Sukuna turns to deal with them, Gojo immediately punishes him with blue, red, or hand-to-hand combat. The constant pressure prevents Sukuna from controlling the pace of the fight the way he did in the original timeline. Eventually, Sukuna summons Maharaga, hoping its adaptation will once again allow him to overcome infinity. But this time, Maharaga is forced to fight more than just Gojo. Igris, Beru, and Toji immediately keep Maharaga occupied while Gojo continues attacking Sukuna. Maharaga still adapts, but it cannot fully focus on infinity because it is constantly being interrupted by the Shadow Army. As the battle continues, Sukuna starts realizing that he is slowly being overwhelmed. Every Shadow Soldier Gojo summons can regenerate after taking damage, meaning Sukuna has to keep defeating the same opponents over and over while also dealing with Gojo himself. For the first time in the fight, Sukuna is forced completely onto the defensive. Gojo sees the opening he has been waiting for. He commands the entire Shadow Army to attack at once. Beru, Igris, Toji, Tank, and the rest of the soldiers rush Sukuna from every direction while Tusk supports them from a distance. Sukuna destroys several shadows, but they continue regenerating, buying Gojo the few seconds he needs. Gojo combines blue and red into one final hollow purple and fires it directly at Sukuna while the Shadow Army prevents him from escaping. The attack completely overwhelms Sukuna before Mahoraga can adapt in time. When the dust settles, Sukuna is finally defeated. With Sukuna gone, Megumi is finally freed, and the greatest threat in Jujutsu Kaisen comes to an end. Now let's be honest, Sukuna had no chance of beating Gojo in this timeline since Gojo almost defeated him in the original timeline. And I hope you guys really like this timeline. Make sure to go like and subscribe because we're trying to hit 50,000 subscribers. And make sure to watch the 2 videos on your screen right now.